And thank you all for coming, particularly for those of you who are hockey fans and missing the USA match. We certainly appreciate you all coming in today. I'm going to introduce each of the other three panelists, and then I'll provide some opening remarks, and then we'll just have a little bit of a Q&A amongst us, and then open it up to questions with about 10 or 15 minutes left in the program. So I'll start with Courtney. Courtney von Luckenhusen is the lead procurement counsel of Motorola Mobility and is the executive director of the Motorola Mobility Foundation. She was a member of the board of directors of the former Eleanor Foundation, is now a member of the board of directors of the Chicago Foundation for Women, a nonprofit organization that focuses on improving the lives of women and girls. She recently was named a member of the Crain's Chicago Business 40 Under 40, class of 2013, so very recent. Jesse Ruiz is a partner in the corporate securities group at Drinker Biddle. He is also the firm's marketing partner. And his list is rather extensive as well of volunteer activities. He's currently a member of the board of directors of ComEd. He is vice president of the Chicago Board of Education, a commissioner on the U.S. Department of Education Equity and Excellence Committee, chairman of the council on re-enrolling students who dropped out of school, and serves on the executive committee of the Chicago Community Trust. He also serves on the board of directors of the Chicago Bar Foundation, Chicago Legal Clinic, Illinois Association of School Boards, Metropolitan Planning Council, Museum of Science Industry, National Museum of American Art, and Rush University Medical Center. Did I miss anything?
I'm embarrassed to say a couple.
Well, and then I'll turn to Tom Cole, who is really embodies community service and not just to the and legal service to the legal community as well. He is a partner in Sidley's Chicago office, where he focuses his practice on public company mergers and acquisitions and corporate governance. He just finished about a year ago a 15-year stint as the chair of the firm's executive committee. That's the committee that exercises general authority over the affairs of the firm. He is a member of the board of trustees of our University of Chicago, chairman emeritus of the board of trustees of Northwestern Memorial Healthcare, director of World Sports Chicago, member of the Economic Club of Chicago, Commercial Club of Chicago, and a Civic Committee and the Law Club of Chicago. He is the former chair of Northwestern University's Garrett Corporate and Securities Law Institute and former co-chair of the Tulane Corporate Law Institute. And also, this spring, apparently he's going to teach a seminar on corporate governance at the law school, and he has done that for a couple of years. Is that correct?
I did it for 5 years until I became chairman of the firm, and
Okay.
I got too busy. I taught last spring. It's a really good course. Sign up
now. So I thought what I'd start with is just sort of a discussion of what this program, more generally, is all about. The program that you're all part of is called the Keystone Professional and Leadership Program. And this is right out of the description of it off your website. It's a professional and leadership program designed to help students prepare for their legal careers. And the word keystone means when an arch is built, it's the last piece that's put in. And it locks all the other pieces together and allows the arch to bear the weight. And without professionalism and leadership, one's professional career cannot ascend to the heights it is capable of reaching. As Amy mentioned, you have in front of you or available to you a one-page article that Tom wrote on law as a profession, which sort of nicely ties into the notion of the Keystone Professionalism and Leadership Program. So I think the first question I'd like to ask, and it's really geared towards Tom, is, why is it important for lawyers to be engaged in the community through nonprofit board service and through being involved in the community?
For me?
For you, yes.
Well, one of the reasons is that a lot of nonprofits, not-for-profits, civic organizations can really use the help. We are exquisitely trained at this law school and frankly other law schools as well, have a perspective on how things should get done, how things should be organized, how organizations should be governed. That is really invaluable to a lot of organizations. Many civic organizations are not big and old like the University of Chicago Board of Trustees, but are really startups. And there are people with great ideas, but like a lot of entrepreneurs, they can use some guidance. So one of the main reasons for doing it is because they need the help. The other part is reflected in my little essay, which is it's really about giving back and about continuing to earn the label professional and continuing to make the legal profession a profession as opposed to simply a business. If all you're interested in is making money, you know, frankly there are easier ways to do it, and there are easier ways to make a lot more. But one of the aspects of the legal profession that keeps you engaged as a professional is the ability to go off and do these other things. It's just like any other extracurricular. Sometimes it can be the most satisfying aspect of your daily life.
Any additional thoughts?
I mean, for as much as you give, I think you get back as well. So there are many opportunities, skills that have helped me professionally, networks that have helped me professionally that I've built, and hopefully I've given as much as I've received. And so it's not a total selfless act. It's important to give back, but you're also receiving as well.
And I think for your entry-level jobs and your first junior associate jobs, it's particularly useful from a developmental aspect, which happens very early in your career. So, for instance, on the Eleanor Foundation that I helped lead here in Chicago, we did a merger and acquisition and gave our money to the Chicago Foundation for Women. It was a great opportunity to do an M&A transaction, even though I'm not an M&A lawyer, right? And then secondly, it was interesting to see all the SCAD lawyers, many of whom U of C folks, who came in and were able to volunteer and see how our board was thinking about what we should do with the money and who we should merge with. And while it's different than the public companies that some of these folks are dealing with on a daily basis as outside counsel, it really was parallel in that the thought process that a board goes through, how you weigh your options, what you need to do in the future, is very analogous. So I think particularly in the beginning of your career, it's a great time to grow your network, certainly, but then in a very concrete way, you can imagine that you're actually gaining very relevant skills, even more than you think at the time, that you will apply later to a real case or a real deal that you're helping, either as a firm lawyer, or if you go in-house like I am, you'll see that you'll be able to apply it as well.
If I could just extend that point, that there is a bit of a networking aspect, but you shouldn't do it for networking.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not. You should do it because you have a certain passion about it. You will only do it well if you do have that passion, and you can give the time to it. If you just sign up and, as they say, phone it in, it will actually be detrimental because you will get a reputation around as being, resume building, trying to schmooze. All they're interested in is in my business, not this organization. So don't make that mistake.
I can't agree more. In fact, when associates in my firm come to me and ask me, how can I get involved and who should I get involved with, the question I always ask them is, what are your passions? What are you interested in? Because if you're not interested in it, as Tom mentioned, it will reflect badly on you, and you might as well not even get involved. So find your passions and explore those kinds of opportunities. So, the next question we sort of have to sort of banter about is the question of how we've all sort of personally benefited from our board service. And I'll sort of throw that up to anyone who wants to jump into it.
Well, it snowballs. And again, it's part of the networking. You don't do it, as Tom mentioned, you don't do it for that purpose. But if you go in there pure heart, pure motives, inevitably it pays back. I mean, one of the reasons I got on the board of directors of Commonwealth Edison, now that's not volunteer, that I get paid to do. But it was through my service on the Chicago Legal Clinic. That was one of my very first nonprofit boards as an associate. It's still a small, relatively small, even though it's been in existence over 25 years now, legal clinic, pro bono and low-cost legal provider in South Chicago and downtown. and in Pilsen. But you know, the future CEO of ComEd was on that board with me. The current general counsel of ComEd was on that board with me. That's where they got to know me. That's where, frankly, they observed the fact that I show up, I do what I say I'm going to do, I deliver, I carry my weight on the board, and they thought that would make a great ComEd board member. And so, yeah, people are watching when you're on those things. It sounds like you can't phone it in. You've got to do the work. And I always tell somebody, exactly as was stated, that you've got to be passionate about things, and thus I choose public education as one of the areas legal services and subcultural institutions. MSI was my favorite museum as a kid growing up on the far south side of Chicago. That's why I do that one. And so I like going there, I like being involved, and there's a strong education component there. So there's some synergies to it. I do a lot of things, but they actually work synergistically, and they can lead to other opportunities. But you know, also for my family to see that my sons, that you can't just sit back and take back at things in life. There's a duty to do things for society at large. That we're all, frankly, if we get to go to this law school, we're blessed. And you've been given a great gift, and you've got to do something with that gift.
Right. And if you think about law as a profession, you know, rather than as an industry, and there is that sort of duty to give back, and we as lawyers, you know, have a unique set of talents to help boards. You know, one of the ways that I've personally benefited from my board service, and I'll get into this in a little bit later, but I was very active in a series of auxiliary boards, young persons boards. And most institutions, most cultural institutions in the city have auxiliary boards. It's a great way to network. It's a great way, frankly, to create friendships outside of the office. And you're working long hours. It gives you a chance to sort of escape from time to time and work with people in board environments or planning events to socialize and create a whole nother network of friends, and they may eventually become clients. But once again, just like doing your job as a board member, you can develop friendships which just naturally lead to other things that are very important long-term in your career.
Yeah, I tell you, one of the great personal benefits is if you pick the right board, you're hanging around with interesting, stimulating people dealing with interesting issues. So I was invited to go on the board of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, which then became healthcare, at the beginning of the first Clinton administration. Remember when healthcare was going to be revolutionized? It didn't happen, but it was still, I immediately accepted, not thinking about networking, not thinking about clients or any of the rest of that, but thinking this is a ringside seat to one of the most important subjects of our time. So that was great. But then, again, continuing on, because I didn't phone it in, I found myself as chair of the Professional Standards Committee, which you might say, what is that? Well, it's basically a quality committee in the hospital. You look at macro outcomes, you look at individual physician issues. Blessedly, we had very few of those. But it was really interesting. And then what I found was, as a law firm manager, it was terribly useful to have that perspective. And it was synergistic as well, because as a law firm manager, I had perspectives that were useful to the hospital. So I was giving back that way, but also getting, because I saw how they were addressing risk management. Frankly, you know, physicians, one or two that would have an issue. And I recall at one of the quality meetings, Professional Standards Committee meetings, we were dealing with the inevitable in a hospital. There was a problem with a single patient, a single physician, and the docs who were on my committee were alarmed, not alarmed, but they were stunned when I asked, after we heard this terrible story about what happened to a baby. It was a terrible story. I asked, how's the physician doing? They never expected to hear that from a lawyer, but they didn't expect to hear it from a lay person either. But it was a perspective. And frankly, as I say, you can learn a lot. I'm in total agreement with what Jesse said.
Yeah. I remember when I was approached to work with Catholic Charities, and they asked me which committee I wanted to serve on, and they asked, well, you probably want to join the Lawyers Committee, correct? I said, That's sort of the last committee I want to join. It's full of lawyers and they want to review documents. That's what I do all day long. So I join the Youth and Child Services Committee. I've gone through several audits through Head Start with that committee over the years, and I've really gotten to know how family programs are delivered through Catholic Charities, through Chicago, by being on that committee. It's been very rewarding. Much like you're in your situation, Sam, you're involved with, in that case, the physicians. In this case, you're hearing directly from the families that are involved, because there are always presentations from families who are being served by Catholic Charities. So it's important to kind of step back from time to time to participate really in that kind of way.
There's another one that came to mind that, again, not a prestige board, not even a board that anybody really knew about. It was the Hispanic Lawyer Scholarship Fund. And I was maybe a 4th, 5th year associate when I started doing it with other 4th, 5th year associates in town. And we would raise money to give scholarships out to law students. And to this day, I've got students who come up and say, thanks, and these people are now who've been practicing for 10, 15 years. You helped me get through law school with that scholarship. And I'm like, I don't even remember these people. But I'll tell you, it feels incredible when it happens from time. It still does. And some of them I do know. And I see, one of them was my lawyer at the State Board of Education. And I thought, son of a gun. I mean, again, I don't kid myself. We didn't give them a full ride, but we helped. And they remembered, and it's incredibly rewarding when they walk up to you and say, hey, you helped me become a lawyer. And again, it's a board that nobody hears about, that it's a small organization. We don't give away a lot of money. We give away $15,000 to $60,000 a year. Not a lot of money in the grand scheme of life, especially in terms of law school tuition, but you're helping people become lawyers. And it makes a big difference in their lives.
Some of these questions they kind of overlap over each other, but the next question I sort of have for the panel is what skills have you developed as a result of your participation on various boards that you've been able to translate in your career or just personally?
So I talked about that a little bit with the Eleanor Foundation, but maybe just take it one step further just to kind of talk about it more broadly. I think when you go in-house, there's a totally, I don't want to say totally, I guess I will say totally different skill set. It's completely different than your general practice of law. You really need to have much better communication, verbal and written. And by better, I don't mean what you learn in law school. It's like you throw everything you learn in law school away and you learn to talk like business people, which is apparently foreign language for us as lawyers. You also kind of need to just, if you want to move up in a company, it's an entirely different path than folks move up through partnership. The politics are different. The ladder's different. The dynamics are different. The opportunities are different because you don't have to just stay in law. And so I think what you gain from board service is to interact with people outside law. You forget when you get into, say, big law or particular areas that are almost all your daily work, particularly when you're more junior. You guys are out dealing with clients a little more often by the time you're partners. But for those of us who start as associates, we're almost always with only other associates and partners. And so you begin to sort of, your world gets kind of small, the way that you talk, the way you interact, the skills that you use. And what's great about a board is suddenly your world gets bigger. You realize what it's like to discuss an issue that might have 20 different ways of looking at it, and you look at it from one way, which is highly valuable. All of you are very smart. The reason you should give back is because honestly, 9 out of 10 times, your analytical skills are probably going to be better than whoever is in the room with you. And that's not to be elitist, but it's to say that you have the ability to change and make change. But you have to look at it from, you don't want to spend all day only with lawyers. So we joke about that, but it's actually something that becomes a bit of a problem in the beginning of your career. So I really encourage you, this is one way you can do that, is to start interacting, communicating, thinking a little differently about how you solve problems, because there is not just one approach to solving problems.
I don't know that it's a skill, but it's a perspective that I've gained. Most of my practice, either between, I sell public companies or buy public companies, so I'm with boards all the time, and when I'm not in a transactional mode, I'm advising public company boards. And one of the perspectives I gained is, as a board member of the university, of a hospital, of other things that I've done, is that this is not my day job. And so when I'm going in to speak to a board now, I recognize that they have perhaps not thought about this subject for the last month or possibly the last quarter. And so it's a little bit like previously on 24. And you have to continually refresh them to get them back up to the starting point that they should be. Otherwise, you will look out and you will see eyes glazed over. And I gained that perspective because my eyes were glazing over at times.
Yeah, yeah. You also have sort of a different perspective of what the fiduciary duties of being a director are when you're on your other side of the table versus when you're advising them. You always try to take fiduciary duties into account whenever you represent a client, but it's very different, as Tom suggests, of being on the other side and of being that volunteer board member or being a director of a public company. But certainly for nonprofits, these are largely unpaid volunteers who dedicate a somewhat more limited amount of time. A lot of the work is done in committees focused on particular areas. And so it's helpful to sort of understand that. And probably one of the boards that I served on where I sort of learned that the best was when my children were younger. I was on the board of the Montessori school that they went to. And we went through several transitions and changes and had to make several important decisions as a board. And you really kind of gather a different perspective when you go through that process of actually making the decisions rather than counseling clients to make the right decisions.
What a basic skill that I always, and Lord knows it's still a work in process, but just organizational skills. That because I do a lot of outside activities and I started doing it after about 3 years of practice. First 3 years I just focused on learning to be a lawyer. You know, you have to juggle a lot, and so it teaches you to juggle a lot. And so when your client work picks up, you're a little bit more comfortable with being busier. And you know, I borrow tools from every board and every organization I sit on, where be it technology tools or just accountability tools that we may use. And oh, this is good. And then I come back to the firm and I'm like, why aren't we doing this? Because lawyers aren't always on the cutting edge of management, believe it or not, especially law firms. And
I don't know about that.
And so I borrow from a lot of organizations, especially some of the smaller organizations, because they're scrappier. They have to be, and so they can do more with less. They don't have the luxury of some of the tools and some of the facilities that I have at my firm, and I can learn things from them.
Actually, one of the skills I learned was to constantly remind myself and the organization that I was not there as a lawyer.
Yeah.
And this is counterintuitive. You think you're going to go on the board, you're effectively going to be there giving legal advice. You don't want to do that. And particularly if you're at a law firm, your law firm will tell you, be sure you're there as any other wise advisor, any other wise director. Now, why do I say that? 2 reasons. One is, if you're sitting in the boardroom as a board member and you start giving legal advice, it will be very confusing and perhaps play into plaintiff's hands someday as to whether it's privileged. So those who are giving legal advice and are there as lawyers can have the privilege. And secondly, if you're giving legal advice, then you're probably implicating your firm's insurance policy. So you need to be very careful about that. But inevitably, I'm sure all of us have the same reaction. We'll be sitting in the boardroom, some legal issue will come up, and everybody turns to you. And you say, well, I'm not here as a lawyer, but if I were.
Yeah. Hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
Yes. How does one choose an organization when you have hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations to choose from? Maybe I'll couple that with the other question, how does one get involved at the associate level? Because I think there are differences. But let's start with sort of how does one choose an organization? We already talked about that a little bit. I'll kind of lead into it. I think the first and foremost criteria for any board that you, or organization that you want to volunteer with, is that you have to be interested in the mission and the purposes of the organization. If you're not, move on. You have to be interested. It will be clear to everyone involved, your other board members or management of the organization that you're not interested. Make sure that it's something that you're very interested in and you're willing to devote the hours to that board, because as Jesse mentioned, you know, as a lawyer, particularly in a big law firm or in-house, you've got a lot of time constraints, and if you're not involved, it will be quickly recognized.
I got on initially most of my nonprofit boards, kind of the folks at the firm, where I think in my third year, and it's kind of counterintuitive. If they thought about it more, they're like, I was the last guy they should have asked, because I was like the highest billing associate in the entire firm. So you kind of show up first on a few lists around the firm. So every partner's like, oh, we'll go to that guy and load him up with more nonprofit stuff. And so literally, I started inheriting board seats from partners in the firm who thought, well, this guy has come to our attention, and so we'll give him, literally, the first 3 nonprofit boards I got on were partners telling me, and I'm thinking, I'm still relatively new at the firm, maybe I can't say no. But I mean, I went, interviewed, investigated the organizations. Some of those we've had a board member, in essence, the firm has had a seat on in these organizations since the founders of our law firm. So that's how I started getting tagged by people in the firm, and then to outside organizations, diversity bar organizations. It was all the members of the firm. I can think of my first 5 boards.
Having said that, if you get invited by a partner saying, this would be a good thing for you to do, if it is not your passion,
Right.
and you turn it down with a persuasive statement,
One
they will respect you more in the morning.
So yeah, I'll say that I had the opposite approach. Actually, Amy and I were colleagues at Skadden at the time when this happened, but another colleague of mine, another female, we both kind of sat down and we both realized, boy, we've got to start doing some things outside the firm that we care about. We realized a lot of things we were being asked to do from partners. Well, we were more than willing to help them out, and we knew that they were passionate about it, so we would go do it. We didn't feel that same fire and passion ourselves, and we were also young mothers at the same time, thinking about how are we going to, do all of this with the family, and if we are going to do it, it's got to be something that at our core is something we think about every day. We also didn't want to sort of have a hands-off board experience for our first board experience. We wanted to really be able to get in there and impact the board. So so with all those things in mind, we went out, the 2 of us together, just did research. Kelly Smith-Haley actually. Went out and did some research on what was in Chicago that really resonated with us. And we found at that time a relatively small nonprofit called the Eleanor Foundation, which is now part of the Chicago Foundation for Women, which is a much more well-known board. So I think you can take a lot of different approaches, but there's nothing wrong with using the internet and thinking through with a friend, because it also was a great professional, personal growth for the 2 of us to have that in common together, even as we went our different ways post the firm. That interest in economic security for women and different women's issues have kept her to be one of my closest professional mentors, and me to her. So everybody's approach is different, but that was mine.
I would add 3 things that fall in the category of due diligence. One is understand the quality of the organization, the quality of the CEO. In many instances, the quality of the CFO, if they have one with that title or playing that role. The quality of the board, because that will tell you they've done their diligence, but don't be deluded. There are a lot of people who will go on boards without doing their research, and so you can find sort of a celebrity board group, and they're just on because somebody else was on. It's a good idea to check it out. And one of the most important things to check out is basically the financial circumstances of the organization. It may be that you can go on and help with that, but you ought to do it with your eyes open. If it's an organization where its mission aspirations exceed its pocketbook, it can run into real trouble. And there are very well-meaning civic organizations with good boards that have filed bankruptcy. And you ought to understand that.
That's a great point. And along those, along the diligence process, one thing that we did was we joined a committee outside of the board first. And so we spent about a year getting heavily engaged with the staff, with what their activities were, being able to see financials through the development process. And we actually went in eyes wide open that it was a little bit upside down, hence merging into CFW, but both feeling that we could actually be a change agent for good, for being able to continue the mission. So being involved in these other committees, most of these boards have various committees, and many of the committees have non-board members sitting on those, and frankly, they really like that.
I mean, picking up on something Tom said, that initially, I can't tell you I did this for the first few boards. I was just humbled by being asked and being invited, and it's almost like somebody wants to date you. You're like, oh, wow, you're like you're being asked to the dance. Now it's like not so much. Now I've gotten a lot smarter, and frankly, I negotiate my board membership with folks nowadays where. One, I do, look up their 990s, go on, become familiar with GuideStar, go to the Illinois Attorney General's office where they should be registered, make sure they are registered. Are they following their 990s? Look to, ask for a copy of their D&O policy. How much is covered? What are the coverage limits? I asked to talk about what's the commitment level, because most nonprofit boards expect you to contribute. In fact, most foundations like to see 100% board participation in terms of contributions, whatever the amount is. So I negotiate how much money, how much time, and what exactly I'm going to do, what I think I can add, what is everybody else doing. Because there are, and in fact, it's kind of surprising that there's some sophisticated business folks on some boards who probably don't know the inner functionings of their organization and would be embarrassed if something went terribly wrong on their watch because they weren't paying attention.
And most of these organizations have strategic plans. So as we talked about the purposes and the mission of the organization, in addition to some of the information that was mentioned earlier, getting a copy of the strategic plan would also be helpful. The way I got involved in board service was largely through auxiliary boards. As I mentioned earlier, I was a member of both the auxiliary board of the Lincoln Park Zoo, and I was a founding member of the Ravinia Associates. And my board service on the Lincoln Park Zoo's auxiliary board really kind of led to my eventual service on the board of trustees of the Lincoln Park Zoo. I also happened to serve as president of the auxiliary board, so I was an ex officio member of the board of trustees as well. Took some time off, and then I was asked to serve on the board of trustees. There's a lot of auxiliary organizations. They are always looking for members. In those organizations, you want to find out what the level of commitment is to the organization financially, what kind of events they run, and equally important, you take a look at the board list and making sure that these are the people you want to identify yourself with, because that becomes important. Auxiliary boards are very event-driven boards. In fact, I spent more time on the auxiliary board of the zoo than I have as a trustee, because you're constantly planning events, which were fun, but they were a lot of work to pull off. But it was all very meaningful from my perspective. So I think the one question that, and this is really for Courtney, is the importance of board service as an in-house attorney and being involved with charitable organizations.
So I think it's hugely important. I mean, the number one thing I missed from the big firms coming in-house, frankly, was the opportunity to do pro bono and the focus on board service that the partners in the firm led by example. That sort of gets lost, particularly if you're at if your company is in difficult times or just happens to be a dynamic company that's not focused in that at the time. So it just depends on every organization that you go in, where their level of sort of already employee engagement, externally facing, and where it's at. So I think as lawyers, with our obligations to sort of, as you said, give back, I think we're the perfect instigators to bring that culture into any company, small, medium, or large, and be a change agent to making sure, if that's not already embedded in the culture, that it is. And so for the company that, Motorola Mobility, where I was at, certainly had a long history of doing a lot of community outreach and went through a lot of transitions lately at different spin-offs. And so we needed to sort of revamp that back up as we come back into Chicago. And so I've led a transformation, and so has actually the entire law department, to do more community outreach. And I now run our foundation. And it's been great, because here we are reaching out to mostly myself and my team and other members of the law department have been the instigators, reaching out to the engineers, to the HR department, to finance, and saying, hey, come with us and do this in the community. So here's this, ooh, lawyers are bad. Doesn't quite work that way, right? Suddenly we have something that shows that our profession has some pretty incredible qualities to it, and we're able to show it in a tangible way and be leaders. So I think it maybe even takes on a little bit more importance when you go to a company, because frankly, I think the big firms have really focused on that. Thankfully, the partners have really made that an important part of what they do, and I appreciate that. I think every company has different levels, and I think you can bring your legal background to bear to show that outreach in your company.
Let me ask you a question. My own observation is that in corporations at the very senior level gets it. They understand it, they're busy, and they're active. But it's the mid-level, and perhaps if you're very junior within the corporation, your immediate supervisor who's not so committed.
Yeah, I think it depends. Every company's different. Every stage of a company is different. Depends on where things are becoming so global, in my perspective, that the senior leadership team, there's an extent to which, are they tied to Chicago, or are they tied to Silicon Valley, or are they tied to Beijing, or depending on the company. So I think they get it, but it's also maybe even more important, to your point, that those people who are more embedded in the particular communities go and get involved. So yes, I think a lot of times it gets lost in translation, for sure.
I just thought of one other diligence question, which is for the law firm types, which is if you're invited to a board, go back to your firm and say, there are certain expectations about my own giving or getting. Sometimes they put it, and I hate the phrase give, get, or get off.
Yep.
But I just think it's terrible. But it's useful to go back to your own firm or your own employer
companies,
and say,
we
I'm
support
going to
all of our
go,
employees.
I intend to support at this level. Are you going to match me?
Because there is that expectation.
There is that
Oh, yes,
expectation.
there
Annual
is.
dinner, is your employer going to buy the table or not? It's kind of expected.
Or
that they
be
will.
a sponsor.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies will. Ours does. So they'll support you. You become a brand ambassador from the company side. So be
But
happy to
in
support
terms
you.
of your own career, and it's going to sound like advice on self-promotion, it's not bad for your employer or your law firm to know you've been invited to one of these. And they probably have a process to go through clearing your participation, because there can also be conflicts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely. So that largely concludes our panel discussion. I'll throw it out to the group for any questions that you may have for any one of us.
My question is pertaining to timing. If you're going into big law, or you're graduating and starting a job, how far out, or how close to graduation would it be prudent, I guess, to start participating in these kinds of activities?
I would suggest maybe a year. I think you need to kind of get your bearings first within the firm, establish relationships within the firm. So after your first year, you can start thinking about joining boards. Getting involved in the community, volunteering is a slightly different matter. I think you can pretty much do that at any time. Again, and most large law firms or companies will have programs for you to participate on a volunteer basis, and that can be done immediately. But board service, I think, is in a slightly different category. I don't know if anyone has any different
As I
perspective.
mentioned, I thought it was important just for me to kind of get the work thing down first.
Yeah, yeah.
And thus I had a goal of like, okay, I'm going to be known as, you know, the guy who.
And maybe
writes
that's 3 or 4 years, and maybe it's a year.
For me, it was after my third year
Yeah.
where I started doing deals, small deals on my own. I was racking up 300-hour billable months all the time, and I wanted to be known as that guy, not the guy who was, you know, off, you know, doing board stuff
Right,
a
right,
lot.
right.
And so, that you eventually are doing a lot of odds. I think the perception is not there that that's what you're really about, as opposed to, you know, building your law practice and your skill set.
Yeah.
The other bit of benefit of waiting is that your organization can keep an eye out for you once they get to know you better, understand how they really want you to be out there in the community as an ambassador. The level of opportunity may actually go up for you.
One thing I'll tell you though, as a lawyer of color, for women I would guess as well, that there's some expectations. So like the Hispanic Lawyer Scholarship Fund didn't want to wait for 3 years before they wanted me to help out and say, you owe us. And you're going to be a member, an active member of the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois. You're going to give money to the Hispanic Lawyer Scholarship Fund. You're going to join the Hispanic National Bar Association. So, you know, I felt that I couldn't say no to some of those things. So I did do, not a lot, but I did do some of those so that I didn't seem like an ungrateful guy who I have supported my profession as a minority lawyer and I'm not giving back.
And I think it depends. I mean, it definitely depends on how passionate you are about it, because you're going to find the time, right? I literally did the merger with the Eleanor Foundation when I was doing a multi-billion-dollar deal that was the biggest one we had in 3 years. And I turned drafts with Skadden at night at 3 a.m. And it wasn't seen as less for my company. It was seen as, holy cow, did she really do that? Because I didn't even know she did that. And I didn't know her team did that. So I think, you know, you have to look at what you can fit in your day and what you're going to be willing to give up. There is no work-life balance on a daily basis in big firms. And by the way, I was a very happy big firm lawyer. Loved it. Amy knows this. So I loved it. But the bottom line is on a daily basis, you have long days. And if this is something you want to fit in right away, then your job is to keep these guys happy and your clients and do that. And they don't even need to know if you're doing it well, right? So it's really your sort of your prerogative. And I think your level of passion drives that.
How were you able to balance a very demanding job and maybe a family or a personal life and multiple board memberships? What was that process like?
Very understanding spouse. And supportive. Literally, my wife doesn't do as much. She does a fair amount, but not as much as I do. And she is the.
She's a big firm partner too, right?
She's Tom's partner.
Right.
And she is the CEO of our household, and I readily acknowledge that. And I work for her. You know, somebody, you got to have a partner in this who's going to support you, assuming you have a partner in life. And if not, a family who's going to support you in these endeavors as well. You know, I've got siblings and elderly parent on the south side of Chicago who want some of my time too. And so, you know, you've got to have folks who are supporting you in what you're doing. That's why, you know, to this day, I mean, so I serve on the school board, and I was talking to then Mayor-elect Emanuel. I made him call the chairman of my firm in Philadelphia and say, no, you got to ask his, you know, you got to ask my hand from the guy who you know, runs this place, so that I would have his 100% support. And it's like, he asked you. You're the one who said yes on my behalf. So they can't, you know, feign that, you know, I went off and did this on my own. So getting support from your support systems is critical.
And depending on the role, where, you know, the kinds of positions Jesse takes, the kinds of positions a lot of folks get, the law firms in particular will understand there is a benefit to them. I mean, one of the things we assess of our partners every year is their ambassadorship. So, for example, our partner John Levy is the chairman of the Legal Services Corporation. You may not have ever heard of it, but it's the interface between the government and civil legal services clinic, legal aid clinics. He gives away $500 million a year. It is a big job. It's very much in the spotlight, and it's very important. So we understand, you know, he's not going to have the chargeable hours, but with the firm benefits and he benefits ultimately, and society benefits. So there you have it.
I have a question question. So from your guys' perspective as more senior members, how do you look at potential conflicts of interest when someone wants to join a nonprofit board, and how do you manage some of the risk that might come up with your employees or people from your firm going out and doing things that may implicate your business or stuff like that?
Jesse's going to answer from the perspective of ComEd and environmental groups. Go, Jesse.
Well put.
You've got to sometimes segment your life very carefully. I mean, first and foremost, I don't join any organization, and it's kind of a rule in our firm, not kind of, it is a rule in the firm. I've got to go to the chief risk management officer of the firm and say, by the way, Jackie, I want to join this organization. They've got to run full conflicts, and they've got to, for our liability insurer, they have to keep track of all my outside commitments all the time. And then when I was chair of the State Board of Education, I would get sued from time to time. Thankfully, I would always say in his official capacity, not personally, but I'd have to report that lawsuit to our firm. So there's some added work and some added vigilance that has to take place when you're doing that work, and be very cognizant. And every board you sit on, it's again required by the IRS. You have to fill out an annual conflict of interest statement. So you got to be cognizant from that point. Our Sidley Austin, my wife works at Sidley Austin. They do some work for Rush University Medical Center. I have to go to my wife and say, can you find out how much that is? What is it regarding? Which Rush entity is it? And I've got to report that. I've got to go from my own firm. We do a little bit for Rush Copley, not a direct related. So there's a lot of homework that you got to be on. That's why I tell you, it does teach you organizational skills, and you kind of got to be on top of your life and your spouse's or partner's life to make sure that you're not going to step in it accidentally because you forgot about that one detail that you should have reported to somebody.
I wasn't kidding about the comment thing. He's not going to answer it, that's clear. But if you join the board of an organization that is, say, has an activist agenda and executes on that through litigation, you just need to understand whether they're going to be going after your clients, your firm's clients. And you may have to stand down, or you may have to choose between your employment. You know what I mean? I mean, you just have to be careful about that. The other thing on picking up Jesse's point, if you go on the board of an organization where your firm does provide legal services, make sure you're very clear that you're not part of the team that's providing legal services. At least that's our approach. And on top of that, we take another step, which is that I decline my share of any fees to the firm from that organization. It can be hundreds of dollars.
Right.
I mean, Tom just raised another point, not related to ComEd, but I mean, one of my larger clients is a little known, not controversial company named Walmart. And so, sometimes they get in the press, and sometimes a few nonprofit boards. I used to be on the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Once in a while, they want to sue, and so you can get in an uncomfortable situation. Now, you don't have a specific legal conflict, but Maldiv was once suing the State Board of Education when I was on both boards. So I had to step out of the room in closed session when that was being discussed, and it gets a little uncomfortable at times, and you got to decide. Sometimes you got to pick your battles and decide which side you want to be on.
Yeah.
You can also end up in conflicts between the two organizations on whose boards you sit.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I was chairing because of the Northwestern Memorial Hospital affiliation, at any trustees meeting here that talks about the medical center, I leave. I mean, I literally leave the room. They organize the agenda so that it comes last, and I can just go home.
Yeah. So and in thinking about the conflict issue, there's different layers and different types. Obviously, some are, most organizations don't present substantial conflicts. Most cultural organizations don't present really much in the way of conflicts, but there certainly are some that do. Healthcare, education institutions do. So. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit more about your responsibilities as a board member on the general board and what you're expected on a personal level in terms of commitment?
It varies depending upon your role within the organization, if you're an officer as well. So let's just talk about just general board involvement. as we've discussed, there's generally some sort of financial commitment. They're generally ask you to serve on at least one committee in addition to board service. Most boards meet quarterly. Some large organizations meet monthly, along with committee meetings. So it could take 5 to 15 hours a month, perhaps, certainly for those that meet monthly. If you include time attending events or preparing for meetings, it may take more.
That's about right.
Yeah.
You know,
Just
the other-
generally.
And again, you know, now the IRS has certain requirements that you've got to distribute the 990s, which is their income tax forms for nonprofits. That, you know, and you should sit down and read those things. You know, nobody's going to check it whether you did or didn't, but you know, for your own sake, it would be good to be conversant in it and look at it and say, yeah, I've looked at it, I don't have any issues, or I don't have any questions raised. Because, you know, Tom will tell you probably to tell you in this course, you know, go back to if some of you have had corporate law, what are the basic duties of director? Duty of care, duty of loyalty. And so duty of care, loyalty, you're probably not a lot of self-dealing with charities, but you will fill out your annual conflict of interest statement and alert if there are any. But duty of care is probably the one for nonprofit directors that's more, I think the Illinois Attorney General's Charitable Trust Bureau would be more concerned with if you weren't doing.
Yeah, the fiduciary duties are the same for not-for-profits as they are for for-profits.
The protections are greater, though.
Yeah,
And
if you're
there's a statutory protection in
Yeah.
most instances.
Yeah, if you're uncompensated, you cannot be held liable for actions taken on behalf of the organization unless you've engaged in willful or wanton misconduct.
But professionally, it's my worst nightmare. That, like, as a corporate lawyer, if I'm on a board and I miss something, kind of would go to my abilities as a counsel. So yeah, I'm a little extra careful about those things because, again, I don't want it. Anything can happen, but you know, do your best to let it not happen on your watch.
Give me an example. One very significant cultural institution here had a investment committee. And I'm not talking about the University of Chicago. Had an investment committee that put a lot of their endowment into hedge funds. And in the meltdown of 2008, they really took it. I mean, it was really bad. And so the press, you know, publishes the box. Who's on the investment committee? And there are all these billionaires. I mean, and investment bankers, and it did not reflect well.
And by the way, just to your point about how much time, that's why you want to negotiate that right up front with lots of transparency. And then also just understand when you're doing your diligence that sort of the maturity level or the stage of the nonprofit will often tell you how much the board is helping to run the company versus sort of being in a more advisory role. And so when you see people that are doing 8, 10, 12 board memberships, you guys can speak to this, but my sense is that those are generally in areas where they're in advisory capacity and digging in maybe on one committee. You might have a more activist role when a charity is in its early stages or in an area where it's fighting to turn itself around or there's some other challenge changing its mission. And it just depends on what you're interested in doing, whether or not you want to be more in an advisory role or whether or not you want to take a more active role. So you need to sort of think about what's good for you and then how you can add value to the charity and its mission.
Which gets to the whole other subject of drawing the line in the right spot between management and oversight. Mm-hmm. And the answer is it depends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think we have time for one more question. For those of us who are already involved with local nonprofits or involved in auxiliary boards, how should we approach that coming into an organization where we may say, have a gala that's very important to us to make, understanding that is not typically something a first-year associate can really put on the table?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think you would just continue on, let people know at the outset. Probably, frankly, it may have been one of the reasons helped get you the job, because they saw that you had this commitment, you were interested in it. They wouldn't expect you to step off, to keep your hours up, that kind of thing. So you would continue it, and don't hesitate to ask for support. I mean, I was literally summoned by 4 of our associates who were very involved in an auxiliary board for the American Cancer Association. They were going to do their very first gala. This had to be, 5, 6 years ago, more than that even. And I was summoned to a meeting, and they said, you know, the firm will support this. I said, yeah, you know, just let me go. No waterboarding. You know?
I think it just on another practical point, I think it makes a bridge for you. You know, it's hard to get to know these guys when they're partners and you're a first-year associate, and it's hard when the only conversations are about, you know, the memo that you're doing. But it's really easy to have a conversation with these guys for 30 seconds in the hallway, sort of your elevator speech, when you're passionate about something. And suddenly they're going to remember you when an awesome assignment comes in on the day job. So I think it provides a bridge, and I encourage you to use it because you need that as you're developing your communication skills.
Well, thank you all for attending. Hopefully you all got something out of this panel discussion. I think we all enjoyed coming here today, so thank you all very much.